Right. Apparently we're live. Hi. Hi, Richard Russell here. Good to see you again. Welcome back to the to this edition of the Scale Up Leader. This week we're going to be doing Q&A, and basically this is a set of questions and answers that have come up to me from my clients. My clients are generally mostly scale up organizations. They tend to be executive teams, but often enough I work with product teams and yeah, I'm not careful. I'm going to have an echo here. Let me close that. Um, so I work with scale ups, and they're usually executive teams, but often other leaders in the organization, whether they're managers, directors, VPs, and that kind of thing, or product managers and people like that. When we're looking at technical leads and product managers who are providing a leadership role in the organization, but not necessarily managing per se. So we're going to have a bunch of questions on those things, those kind of topics. So a lot of these questions have been sent to me. Some of them are questions that have come from my clients over the past, I don't know, year or two. If you have questions, post the comments and questions on LinkedIn or YouTube. I should see them. They should pop up on the comments stream here, and I'll put them on screen, and then I'll be able to answer that question live. Otherwise, I'll go through some of the questions that have been submitted earlier. But yeah, feel free to drop a note or a question in there. If you're there, say hi. It'd be it's always nice to know who's listening. I see a number here, but the number is never accurate anyway. So currently it says 0, but I happen to know that usually it says 0 and there's about 5 or 10 people watching. So I don't know why the number's wrong on StreamYard. If you're watching StreamYard, please fix it. Anyway, so let's go into some questions, and I'm going to ask to go through a couple of questions that have come up to me from other people. And this first one's actually from a client. And the question is, our output metrics take more than a quarter to see a change. How do we set OKRs for such a short period, like a quarter? And this is a really interesting question because the situation here and the situation that's common amongst my customers, I mean, every customer who has this situation thinks it's some sort of unique and they think that their organization is really different. Actually, it's really common. The situation is when we do things to our product, when we do things to anything we might do in our organization, new features, new programs, changing our marketing, whatever, the actual result in terms of the new revenue, the new users, the increased usage, whatever it is, may happen 6 months later. It may happen 18 months later. It depends what it is. Sometimes we're working on a product or a feature that is very large, and it might just take 6 months to build, and so take a year to build. So we have to have some sort of milestones along the way. Now, this is not unusual. This is normal. Okay, every business has this problem, and in fact, yes, it is a difficult problem. It's nicer if you have a really short cycle time. When you're an early stage startup, you can be working on something, and you will see a change really rapidly. Oh, hello, Yazia. Yazia says hi. Good to see you. So you can be working on something, and the metrics will change really rapidly. You can test it out in the marketplace. You have a very close cycle time. It's wonderful, and that's great. If you're in that situation, then definitely use those output customer-based metrics. Use revenue, use new users, use who's in the funnel, use conversion rates, things like that. Use usage, whatever it is that's going to be affecting things. However, if you're in a company where there's some form of delay, right? There's something going on that causes it takes a bit of time for those numbers to come through. For example, you work with a whole lot of partners, and in order to do something that has an impact on your business, you have to create a feature. Then you have to get your partners to adopt the feature. Then you have to get the users to use the feature, right? Or the end customers to use the feature. That just introduces a cycle time, and it's quite slow. So, what do you do in this situation? So clearly, the first thing to do is to do some product discovery and try and do the work that you're required to try and understand your customers and understand what is actually going to drive this behavior. Like, you want to increase usage for your products despite the delays. What are you going to do that's going to increase usage? How do we understand our customers more? Now, there's a whole lot of product discovery work that you need to do to really understand what are the levers that need to move. Once you've found those levers, you put those levers into your OKRs. So, for example, with a lot of products, let's suppose you're an e-commerce business, but you have partners, and so you have your e-commerce wholesale business, let's say, and you need to be able to do something that increases end user sales, right, by your partners. Kind of making up this business as I go along here, but I'm not sure it's a great business. But you need to do something. You need to change something about your product. Maybe you need to change the load speed. You think the load speed is going to be the thing that makes the difference, or you're going to change the picture quality, the image quality. But in order to use the image quality, you maybe have to take a whole lot of images that are of higher quality and then store them at high quality and then serve them high quality, and then upgrade all of the landing pages on your partner sites to have high quality images, right? Or more images, let's say. So whatever it is, you're doing this, you set an OKR to be able to say, we can deliver the page load in less than 1 second or less than 800 milliseconds or whatever time you think is the right time. You start measuring that. Now, what's going on is you're getting your team to focus on that particular issue. Now, as another example, you might be saying where we have a milestone that partners can get high quality images when they are available. That's a good customer facing or partner facing milestone key result. So you can use that kind of thing, and that drives your team to do the right behavior, which is make it so that that particular feature works, make it so that things happen fast, make it so that we can have multiple pictures or whatever it is we need to do. And that's the right thing that is going to deliver that value in the end. Right. Now, in the end, you've got the problem of how do I know whether this is going to work for my business? How am I going to know that this is going to deliver results? And the answer is you don't know unless you've done the product discovery work and you have confidence, and until the customers start using it. But in the meantime, at least you know what you're trying to work on, and your teams know what they're trying to work on, and they're delivering this. Now, the things that I've mentioned here, because I've made them up on the spot, are a little bit like small features, and maybe that's too small a scale. But if you had something that's a little larger, such as the page, the speed load might be a page load time, using the wrong word. So, the time it takes to load the page might be a big thing, or the responsiveness, or the number of clicks required to perform some function, right? Those things might be very useful metrics that you want to be able to track, and they could be things that are really valuable things to be creating. So hence they're good things for your team to be working on, and you know that they will deliver results. As I say, it's always best if you can have the actual results for the customer, but you have to do something that is actually relevant for your teams this quarter. Otherwise, they literally say, well, I can't do anything that's going to affect customer usage this quarter because all of the things that I deliver, I have to have 6 other things in mind before we do it. We just close my WhatsApp in the background so it doesn't beep at me. All right, so that was about how our output metrics take more than a quarter to see a change. How do we set OKRs for such a short period? One of the other questions that comes up sometimes for me, actually, and I'll just put this up again. If you do have any questions, post them on LinkedIn and YouTube. Just stick the note in there; they'll come through to me. The next question I wanted to go to is what's different about OKRs in scale-ups versus more mature companies? Right? What's different about this? I mean, I talk about scale-ups a lot because that's my target market. And why is that really different to how we do it in large companies? In a sense, yes, and in a sense they are different. In a sense, they're not. So fundamentally, people are people, and management is management, and leading is leading. And we use goals, and we communicate about our objectives and the definitions of success and the things that we do in the same ways in big companies and in small companies. So in many ways, OKRs are basically the same kind of concept. It doesn't really matter where you are, what you're doing. It's basically the same concept, and you're doing the same kinds of things with it. You may end up setting different goals, but you'll set different goals and different objectives and different key results in different companies because you have different strategies. And so some of those strategies are commonly different amongst scale-ups compared to more mature companies. As scale-ups, you're more likely to be focused on significant growth, massive growth, whereas more mature companies, there's a lot more optimization going on. But that's kind of a strategy question as opposed to an OKR question. The thing that is different for me, the thing that the reason I talk about scale-ups specifically, is partially because I come from that background of big tech, like the end of the road for scales, like when you get to scale, and also from working with scale-ups and with early stage startups. So it's my natural environment. It's the area that I feel most comfortable in. The second thing that I find very different is that in scale-ups, almost always management and leaders and people in the scale-up are keen to change, and they're keen to improve and learn. And they frequently enough, because they're scaling up, because they're in the middle of like growth, they've gone from 5 people to 50 people to 200 people. And at that point in time, they have these big pains because the methods of management that worked for early stage don't work when you get to 500 or 200, even 50 people. It becomes a bit complicated and a bit different. So then they're looking for a change. And so frequently enough, my experience is that the reason I focus on scale-ups is because the managers there are really keen for change and keen to learn and do new things. Whereas in more mature companies, sometimes they are and sometimes they're not. And you can't tell from the outside. It's very hard to tell whether they're going to be receptive and want to change things and want to do things new in a new way, or if they have the ambition, or if they just said, we'd like to be more like Google, and we've heard that OKRs are kind of what Google does, so we should do that. And that's not a great motivation for change, and it doesn't tend to last. It doesn't tend to drive the real changes in behavior they need to have, which are not about setting goals in a particular way. It's all about how you lead and how you communicate. Right. So yeah, I'm going to jump on to the next question. As always, if you do have a question, just drop a comment in LinkedIn or YouTube and ask a question about any of these things. If something come up from you, if it triggers something, just put enough context in the question so I can understand it, and try and have like just 2 lines there so I can actually read it. So if it's a bit long, it won't fit on my screen. Otherwise, we'll go on to the next question in my list here. So this is a question that's quite common as well. This comes up in almost every company that I've worked with. If we use OKRs to say no to other work being work that isn't contributing to our OKRs, which is really the mechanism for focus, how do the urgent and important things that come up during the quarter get done? How do we do other things? Like if we're saying no to things, and the corollary to this, or the flip sides of this, is that if we do all those urgent things, how do we make sure we're doing enough work on our OKRs? And this is quite a profound question, and this comes up because a lot of people in the OKR world talk about using OKRs to say no, and I certainly talk about this as well. They're a great focusing mechanism, and Steve Jobs had this really good video quote, or what some, in fact, when he was alive, in fact, when he first rejoined Apple about 20 years ago, or 15 years ago, whenever it was. And he had this quote, which was basically about focus. And he says, focus, people think, and I'm going to misquote him here, but people think that focus is about saying yes to certain things, as that, deciding to focus on this or focus on that. And so I say yes to this. And focus is about saying yes harder. But that's not true. What focus is actually about, it's about saying no. So you have to decide, I'm not going to do those things. These are things I'm not doing so that I can do this. Now, OKRs help you with that because they're basically, the objective and the key results are saying these are the things that are important. These are what you should be focusing on. If something isn't one of these things, then probably say no to it. Hence the question, well, what about the urgent and important things? Because there are always urgent and important things that come up. Now, here's an area that is actually interestingly similar to the other question. It's a bit different for scale-ups than it is for more mature companies. In a scale-up, there are more fires, more urgent and important things that pop up randomly and fast. But also, a lot of those things can be left. And if you read Reid Hoffman's, is it Reid Hoffman? I think that's the right read. I might be getting the wrong read. But the guy who wrote Blitz Scaling, the ex-LinkedIn guy, I'm pretty sure it's Reid Hoffman. Read his Blitz Scaling book anyway, the book on called Blitz Scaling. He talks about just leave most of the fires burning and put out the most important ones. Just worry about the most important ones. And when you're a scale-up, this is the right way to do it. You can leave some fires burning because as you're scaling, you're growing fast. When you get to the next level of scale, or just a bit more scale, it becomes easier to put out certain types of fires. So you need to select your fires, which fires you're going to do. In a more established company, you kind of need to work on a few more things at the same time sometimes, I think. But again, my focus is on scale-up, so I think more about the scale-up problem. So number one, some of those urgent and important things, when they really are urgent and important, they can still be left, and that's okay, and you can leave them. Often those urgent and important things aren't actually urgent and important at all, and they just sound like it because someone's yelling about them. And so there's this, no matter what you do, there's no hard and fast rule here. There's no sort of like, you can only work on 3 urgent and important things in a quarter, and you can only do this with 10% of your time or anything like that. There's no hard and fast rule because every situation is different. And as leaders, we need to be making constant judgment calls over whether this interruption urgent and important? Should I put it? If it's not, well, let's not think about it at all. If it is urgent and important, should we address it now, or should we patch it up, like just work around it? Should we actually solve the root cause right now, right? Like, open that right. Should we solve the root cause? Should we just patch it up, or should we ignore it, right? And all sorts of urgent and important things can go in those 3 buckets. Do I just put the fire out and keep moving? And now, if we do that, what you're doing is you're potentially saving up debt for a future, which is a problem. However, you then have the OKRs to help you focus on the things that you need to solve. You can decide which pieces of debt I'm going to be working on which quarter, as opposed to, oh no, there's a fire, let's go and fix everything related to this fire right now. May be a good idea, may not be a good idea. You have to make a conscious choice. So that's the biggest thing, is like using that constant judgment. The second thing that's interesting here, I think, is just tracking. And I sent I can't remember if I sent a post or an email about this or both, but I certainly wrote about this recently. Just track, what are you doing? How much time are you spending on OKR things, like things you've consciously thought about and decided to invest in? And how much time are you spending on interruptions and urgent and important things and firefighting and things like that? right? Now, again, it's not that 10% is too much, or it's okay to spend 30% on not all circumstances. There's no right answer to this. In different organizations, in different times, in different teams, it might be 90% is okay spending on urgent and important things. Like if you're in sales, for example, every deal is urgent and important all the time, and you should spend most of your time on those deals. If you're in customer support, frequently enough, most of your work is interrupt-driven, urgent, and important because customers have needs, and that's the right thing to be doing. If you're in product or engineering or something like that, you need to be working on a lot of the strategic things and less time on those urgent and important things, but they need to happen anyway. Bug fixes need to happen. Security incidences need to be fixed. Track the time, track how much time you're spending on it, and have a look at it, decide at the end of the day, is this too much time, or is this the right amount of time? If it's too much time, or is it too little time for that matter? If it's too much time, then start changing it. Start investing more in things. Start being more willing to say yes to things. If it's too much time, which is usually the problem, to be honest, be more aggressive about deciding which ones of those urgent and important things to work on, and which ones to just patch up now, and which ones to leave for another day. Let the fire burn, right? So that's one of the things to think about here. Consciously think about how much time you're allocating to these things. Now, on a regular basis, though, you have this regular sort of we have like our weekly meeting, we're doing reviews of stuff. What you want to be doing is making sure that you're reviewing on one side, you're having a weekly meeting about the plans that you've made to deliver your OKRs and the work that you're doing to deliver your OKRs. And again, I've talked about this previously, but structure that around the plan. So as opposed to reviewing the OKR each time, review the plan and then think about how does that help me read the OKR. On the other side, you can be reviewing your weekly metrics deck and your regular anecdotes from customers or whatever it is, the complaints or the issues that are popping up, the anecdotal issues that are popping up. You look at your data and your anecdotes, right? And then this kind of thing is something that happens every week. You're looking at your key performance indicators, your metrics deck, whatever it is, you're comparing it to last week, you're seeing what's happened, what's changed, which fires have started, which fires have gone out. How do we know whether this is really a fire or not? And because you're looking at this regularly, you're able to see and start making those judgments about what should I be doing here? Should I be spending more time on this or less time on this? Do I need to do this? But you've got these two mechanisms, these reviews, to drive. First of all, which channel am I using? First of all, the planned project work, the planned work that is urgent and not, or important but not urgent, which is the OKR type work. But then you're also reviewing your metrics to decide which things are urgent and important that I need to interrupt and do things with. And you're making some conscious decisions about this. The key here is to use your brain. My old manager, Nikos Krivosidis, a fantastic manager from Google, I learned huge amounts from him. He always used to say, don't do anything stupid, right? And the idea here is that, yes, you have OKRs and they tell you what to focus on, urgent and important things come up, but use your brain. Think about this. Think about what you're actually trying to do. Make conscious decisions about, should I be spending time on this, or should the team be spending time on this or that? Is this worth interrupting ourselves for? And you need to make those right decisions. And don't just simply look at your OKRs and say, well, the right decision is to do this. However, my OKRs say that, therefore I must do that, right? That's what Nikos would call a stupid thing to do, right? That's doing the stupid thing. Do the thing that's sensible. Okay. Again, if you have any comments, questions, drop them on LinkedIn and YouTube. I'm happy to address them as we go through this show. This is a question that came up recently with one of my customers. Can I use OKRs to transition from a sales-led organization to a product or customer-led organization? Or how does this help us? Now, this is a common thing that people want to do because frequently enough, if you have started a business, sales are super important. I've started this business here, and I did a whole lot of work on content and on delivery and all sorts of things. I got it to a certain level that I felt comfortable enough. Maybe I overinvested even. And then I started investing in sales and marketing, and I've certainly discovered that that's the key to getting my business going. And if I sell something, I know that I have the capability to put the delivery together. I've done it a few times. I can adjust it. I can deliver it. But the real trick is the sales, getting the sales going. And anyone in a startup, early stage startup, knows 100%. Because if you haven't done this, if you haven't realized this, then you're probably not a scale up. That sales is often the thing that you need to focus on at early stage. You need to get sales working, get marketing working, all that sort of stuff. At some stage, at least, for many organizations, you get to a point where you realize I need to actually focus on the product and make sure the product is driving growth. And this can happen in different cases, especially if you've gone from enterprise and you're moving down market into a more mass market area, or you're going through some sort of platform sale. You sell the platform, but then you need to increase usage. But often enough, it's literally just, we started out selling some stuff and we've just been selling and building, and now we've got delivery and selling, and now we've got to make sure that we're building a product out of this, right? So can I use OKRs to help transition this? Yes, you can. This works really well. It's obviously OKRs are not going to magically do that transition for you. The transition happens with conscious effort from leaders and management and from the team, like understanding what we're doing, talking about what we're doing, slowly and consciously changing how we make decisions and how we prioritize. However, a lot of that is tied up in OKRs, and OKRs can help you have that process of thinking about how we're prioritizing and pushing some of these product and customer-driven priorities to the top of the queue, instead of merely being led by, we have a new deal, we need to do this feature because this customer wants this feature, right? Now, that if you have nothing else, then that's going to, that salesperson, that sale is going to be the thing that will drive everything else, because you have very little else to push back with. You have to have a very strong product organization, a strong roadmap, a strong customer discovery, clear strategy around this. Doing this really helps if you have OKRs, because you can say, here's our strategy and this is what we're trying to achieve this quarter. And yes, customer, that's a wonderful feature. It sounds great. We'll do some discovery and then decide whether to implement it across the board, and then integrate it into our following quarter's OKRs, right? Not always the right answer. Sometimes the right answer is to jump when the customer says jump. It's not sometimes the case, but you have to use your brain and think about these things, as we said before. But basically, yes, OKRs will help you because they provide a little bit of structure around goal setting and about prioritization, and that helps you make sure you're thinking through what are you really trying to do. And product-led and customer-led is really about putting that planning in place and putting that thinking process, strategic thinking process in place, so that you're not simply responding to every single customer. So yes, OKRs can help this transition. They won't do it for you. They won't magically do it. In fact, I sometimes say OKRs don't work, as in OKRs don't do things for you. Like, if you don't change the way you're managing, simply writing your goals in an OKR form might help, but it's not really going to change much. The thing you need to change is how you're leading and how you're interacting with people and how you're communicating with people. All right. Now here's another question that's this is another question that's come up, and this is kind of a slightly off topic. Well, this originally came up as an off topic question. The real question that was written here was in an email, and it was actually from my mum. But the question that prompted this, the question was, can you use OKRs in a marriage or in a relationship? Which I thought was a fascinating question. And so I've adapted this just into something that does actually get asked by a few more people than that. Can I use it in my personal life or in my relationships? Now, often enough, people use OKRs in their work life as an individual. I don't. I know I'm an OKR coach and I'm supposed to use OKRs for everything and have them all over my walls and everything like that. I find that the biggest value with OKRs is in aligning teams and getting focus for a team and getting different people communicating in the right way and getting that engagement. And for myself as a businessman, and I have a business with one person, I have some people who do some things for me, but basically I'm a solopreneur. I find that it's not that helpful for me. It's just not the way I think and work. I do use the thinking process, but I don't really help write them down and have that cycle. It's an overhead that I don't need in my business. When you get to larger, you need that overhead to make sure that everyone's working. Some people love it for their own business, their own working life, their own goals. One thing that's happened to me over the last couple of months, 6 months, I suppose, I've started writing down my tasks in a to-do list fashion. I've got to-do lists, I've got project planning, I've got Asana and to-dos, and I'm starting to use that. And I'll probably actually start putting goals in place to help create some discipline for myself, but I'm not doing it yet. Some people do it for their work life, and it works really well for them. And I certainly think there's value in it, but you have to choose to do the right level of overhead that works for you and solves a real problem. So in your personal life and in your relationships, do you want to do it? Maybe. I personally wouldn't want to use that kind of mechanism in a relationship, in my relationships with people, whether it's my wife or my kids or friends or whatever it is, my family, because I prefer not to have that goal orientation in my relationships. I prefer to have a relationship which is more about the relationship, about what we're doing and things like that. We talk about goals frequently enough, but I don't want to have goals for the relationship. Well, maybe I do want to have some goals for the relationship, but I don't want to turn a relationship into an execution problem and a strategy problem. I would like to have my relationship being a relationship. Personal life for me at the moment, I'm working on health, and I'm working on Luxembourgish. Like learning Luxembourgish. I live in Luxembourg and I need to learn the language, and I want to learn the language. So I'm learning Luxembourgish and I'm working on my health. So I have these things as goals and tasks and to-dos and habits that I'm trying to drive in my life. If you're the kind of person who really likes to set quarterly goals and use that structure even without the communicating with a team aspect and aligning a team because you've just got yourself, yeah, use them, write them down, say what you want to do, and get them done, and see what helps. See if it helps to try and put it as a habit or an input thing. Like I will practice my Luxembourgish, or I will go to the gym twice a week, or I practice the language for half an hour every day. That may be the right place. For me, I use a habit tracking tool to do that, and a to-do list tool just to remind myself to do those things and remind myself to take the bin out and things like that. For me, this is more about, I know that I want to create a habit, so I just want to make sure those patterns happen. It's not necessarily that I have a goal that I'm working towards that I need to keep this thing towards. I know what the pattern is. I know that the pattern will get me to the goal I have, so that's what I'm doing. So that's all I do. But yeah, if you want to do it, go for it. I mean, it might well help. But I wouldn't feel like in order to use OKRs well, you don't have to use OKRs everywhere to use them well, right? Use them when they solve a problem for you. So in an organization, when you've got to get the team focused and aligned and people are going off in different directions and people aren't understanding the strategy or making different decisions, or people aren't engaged or empowered to actually do things, and they're focused on tasks and they're not really understanding what their task is related to the business, yeah, OKRs are really, really, really helpful for solving that problem. If you need to create a cadence, create a cadence. Have your goals written as a cadence. If you need to have a reminder of what you're trying to achieve, yeah, write that down and it can help you. But make sure it's something that's going to help you, as opposed to just, I've heard OKRs are good, we should do it. Okay. I'm just going to pop that up there again. Feel free to put the comments and questions on LinkedIn or YouTube. By the way, if you're finding this useful, drop a like into wherever you're watching it, like in LinkedIn, YouTube, or Twitter. I don't see comments on Twitter, but if you drop a link, drop a like or a subscribe or whatever it is, you'll see more of this, and I'll know what you liked and what to do more of. If you do want to get in touch with me, you can use LinkedIn. I'm sure whatever you're using, you'll find a way of getting in touch with me. Feel free to reach out. I do work with OKRs with large companies, with growth companies, like usually from 50 people to 200 people, 500 people thereabouts. I do work with individual leaders and managers and smaller organizations and large organizations as well, but my focus is on those scale ups. If you're interested, get in touch and we'll talk about how I can help, or whether I can help. I can't always help everybody, so we can talk about that then. Okay. So we're going to go through a couple more questions here. There's one more really specific one. So this is a very specific question. We use SAFe, the Scaled Agile framework. So we already have a cadence. If it's SAFe now, I'm not a Scrum guy. I've used Scrum. I like it. I think it's a good idea. I'm not a SAFe guy. I haven't used it. I don't have a like or a dislike for it. I know people have strong opinions about SAFe, I'm sure. But apparently with SAFe, you have a cadence. There's a cadence set for the planning cadence, and then you do the work for over a quarter or whatever period of time you've decided to do, I guess. Again, I don't know SAFe well enough. Someone else can tell me, correct me if I'm wrong. But most certainly this customer, they had SAFe, they already have a cadence. How do we integrate OKRs with that? In this customer's case, their SAFe cadence was quarterly, and then they have like a planning cycle before that, right? So you start out at the start of the quarter and you do your work, but your planning cycle is 2 weeks before the end of the quarter, or 10 days or something like that before the end of the previous quarter, and they do their engineering and product planning. Now, the way I would work, there's no right and wrong answer to this. There's my answer and there's other people's answers, which might be the same, might be different. My answer is that I would focus OKRs on the management team, on the exec team, and what we're trying to achieve as an organization, and try and do it before the planning process of the SAFe cadence, right? Because that would be helpful. But sometimes it's hard to do it just right at the very start, but let's try and do it. And then use those goals as a feed in to what's happening in that process. Now, obviously, if you're doing any sort of discovery product work, a lot of that discovery and product work, working with customers and so on, customer interviews, things like that, a lot of that should feed into the strategy. A lot of those learnings should feed into the strategy. So you need to make sure you have a mechanism to make sure that sort of stuff bubbles up. In some cases, when you have these agile type frameworks, that bubbles up just to the point where you're making the plan for the sprint, and then comes back down again through that. And that's great. It's really helpful. It's a good thing. However, if you're going to have goals for the organization, you want to make sure that some of that, at least the most important parts of that, bubble up to the top of the management chain, so that those goals can be set with full understanding of what customers are doing, like what customers need and what's going to work in the organization. Otherwise, the goals and the strategy and all of the decisions, okay, whether you're using OKRs or not, to be honest, but especially if you're using OKRs, you want to make sure that they're going to be informed by customer discovery. So make sure that that's being fed up, one thing. The second thing is try and set the goals at the management level with some of that input, like taking it into account as input, but then also as you're setting the key results are really helpful to integrate with the process of doing your SAFe or Scrum or whatever it is planning that you do for the quarter. So whatever you use, big rock planning, big room planning, big rocks, little rocks, whatever you're using, make sure that that process is linked in, so that when we're talking about what key results we're going to generate this quarter, the people doing the work understand what it is and have some sense of realism about, can we actually achieve this? Is it possible? And are we planning to achieve this? Because otherwise you're at risk of setting the goals, but at the same time, the engineering and product team have created their sprint roadmap or whatever artifact you have with SAFe. You've created your plan, and they don't match. And you've got a goal to do one thing, and the team's doing a different thing, and they don't match. So you want to try and integrate them together, so that there's at least, at very minimum, you can pass the OKRs across to the planning process, so that you know what goals we're trying to hit. Ideally, you would integrate them so that that planning process has a little more back and forth, and you can have some discussion about what you're trying to achieve, when, why, and how realistically it is, so that the goals, the OKRs, get set with full understanding of what the team is going to actually produce. The other thing to think about with this is that you don't have to line the cadences up with anything in particular. You can, like most organizations, for most things, use quarterly cadence, like calendar quarters, because that's how most financial services, financial reporting works. It's usually quarter-based, and hence that's how most customers work. They work on a quarterly basis, so budgets organized by quarter, and decisions are made on a quarterly basis. And if you have any sales, they tend to close in the last week of the quarter, all that sort of stuff. So quarters tend to be a pretty good selection for most purposes. However, different organizations do these things differently. And so sometimes you can have some sort of product and technical development framework that has a 2-week cycle, like a Scrum, a sprint, doing these 2-week sprints. You might have 6-week sprints. You might have 6-week, whatever other mechanism you use, 6-week cycles for that. You might have 6-month cycles, whatever you want to do, but choose the cycles that work for the situation you have. And the same with OKRs. I have come across organizations that have an OKR cycle, which is 6 weeks. I've seen them that is 3 months. I've seen that it's 12 weeks, not 3 months, just 12 weeks. And I've seen them that are 4 months, for 3 cycles a year, 6 months. And I've even seen one that had three-month quarters, or whatever they would call them, three-month cycles with a 1-month gap between each one. So the 1 month was there, we're not executing OKRs right now, we're just doing our planning and thinking, and everyone's having their holiday. They were French, so they had quite a lot of holidays, and they timed these things so that one of the breaks was Christmas, and then they have January, February, March to do the OKR quarter. Then they have April, which was the Easter break, where people would go on holiday, and they do the planning for the next one quarter. Then they have April, May, June, July to execute, and then everyone goes away in August in Europe because it's summer. And so that was the planning time, and then they come back after the vacation. In September, October, November would be the execution time, and December would be the break time again to do the planning again. So this cycle sort of continued around the quarter. I have a feeling that I've got my months slightly wrong there, but anyway, I think it's right. So, but whatever they did, that's how they did it, and it works. And the point is that some parts of your organization will naturally have calendar quarters. Some parts of your organization might be out of sync with that. They might be structured around school terms. It might be structured around university terms, for that matter. It might be structured around just the holiday seasons. It might be structured around the vacation periods and like the peak periods for whatever business you're in. If you're in e-commerce, usually for most e-commerce, Q4, the fourth quarter, is really busy because that's when Christmas, and if you're American, you have Thanksgiving and all those kinds of things happen, Black Friday and everything else. It all happens then. Right, so lots and lots of sales, then everyone's really busy. But if you're in logistics, and you're in logistics for e-commerce, a lot of your business, unless you're in operations, but if you're in planning or in buying or in supply chain, like sourcing products, your busy time is Q2 because you have to get everything ready for Q4, right? So that's how those kinds of businesses work, and you have this annual cycle. But different kinds of businesses just have different cycles, and different parts of the business have different cycles, and that's okay. It's ideal if you can line them all up, and so everyone has the same cadence and so on. We're sort of stepping in lock sync, and we have a sequence where we decide this, and then we do this, and then we do that, and then we execute. And that kind of sequence is ideal. But at the same time, if you have these cycles so they're not too long, 3 months or so thereabouts, then the worst that happens is you get a little bit out of sync and you have to adjust a bit or adjust the following cycle, and you can then start slowly adjust and align things. Point to me is like get a cadence in, get a cadence that seems to make sense, and adjust it when you need to. Okay, so we're at 35 past. My voice is getting tired, and I'm guessing your ears are getting tired of hearing me. I've got a couple more questions here that I've come up with I think are really interesting. So I'll tell you what I'll do is I'm going to give myself a bit more energy, and we're going to go through these other questions just because then we've got them, and I think that they're actually quite interesting questions. These questions are all about management and how to work with managers, and OKRs and managers, right? So, question here: how do I convince my management to adopt OKRs? This is really hard, and the reason is because managers have a habit of deciding things for themselves. In some ways, that's how they got there, and that's what their job is. And so it can be really hard to convince people to do this. If you want to do it, you can try, and often you'll succeed. Sometimes you won't. So I recommend trying to make sure that you're happy in your situation, even if your managers say no to something like this, or change your situation, like go to another organization where there is that desire. However, how do I convince? Let's say that this is something you want to do, and your management's somewhat open-minded to it. How do you convince them? There are two basic ways I think that happen here. One way is the way that is the obvious way, but it's a bit harder. But it's hard. It's obviously harder, but when it works really well. And that's convince your management to do it, right? So if you can talk to them about OKRs and say, hey, this is great, this is a really useful technique. Here's why. Show them the books and whatever it is. What it really depends on is understanding them and their needs and what problems they're trying to solve, and then presenting how OKRs solve the problems that they have. Like if you should tell them, if you would talk to your management and say, we should use OKRs because Google use OKRs and Google's very successful. It doesn't fly very well and it's not very compelling. It doesn't make a difference. What matters is when managers are struggling with some particular issue, some thing that they're trying to do, they're bothered by the fact that everyone's not aligned, or that there's not enough focus, or that people don't seem to be engaged in understanding how their work relates to delivery, or they're frustrated by the pace of execution, and you think that maybe this is to do with focus and to do with so many different things and different changing priorities. That kind of thing, if they have those kinds of problems, then OKRs are actually a great solution to those problems. And you can present OKRs, here is a potential solution to these problems. And if they can do it, the reason this works well is if they decide to do it, the best way to implement OKRs in an organization is to start at the top, right? Start at that top level and start there and then roll it down. When you go for a subset like your team, it can work really well. It's not bad, but that getting from there to go up the organization is still hard, and it's still very hard to do that unless it's run as a conscious pilot. So which brings us to the second method, which is to do it yourself. Oh, I'll go back to the first bit. The other thing, by the way, when you're suggesting anything, this is a top tip for convincing management about anything at all, right? Make sure you're satisfying them on the things that they think are important first. I had this experience once where I was working at Google. So actually my first management job. And I made the mistake of trying to change my manager's mind on a bunch of things that I thought were really important that he didn't, while also not yet delivering what he thought was really important for me. And because I was new to the organization, and in fact, I thought that those things weren't important and these things were, we should do those things instead. So I wasn't delivering the metrics and the improvements to the particular metrics he thought were important. With hindsight, I think he was actually right in most cases, although I also think that I did have a point, and that was a good point. However, my purpose of this statement is that unless you're delivering what your manager is looking for, then they're not usually interested in your ideas. And this may seem unfair and harsh, but it is what it is. So make sure you're delivering whatever it is that they're looking for. Then they'll be very interested in your ideas, and they'll have patience and interest to hear your ideas. So that's my top tip for that. Do that anyway. So that's especially if you're convincing them to do it. Now, if you can't convince them to do it, you don't want to go directly to them. The other way to do this is to implement it yourself. However, here's the big but with this problem. This is your situation here. If you set OKRs and you're using OKRs as the way I like to use them, which is like a directional tool, like here's how we're going about, here's what we're trying to achieve. You've got to be very careful about how they're interpreted as expectation management, right? Because you'll have stakeholders and managers, and this is actually very related to the point I just made about keeping a manager happy. Whatever you're doing, you need to be managing their expectations consciously and telling them, making sure that they know what's going to happen, what's not going to happen, and what to expect, what not to expect. So make sure that you're communicating very clearly about this is the expectation you should have. Now, if you're going to use OKRs with ambition, like with stretch goals for your team, because it's going to inspire your team, we're going to have a stretch goal that we might get to 70% of that goal, and that'd be great. And if we get to 100%, it'd be amazing. And you tell people that you're going to, like let's suppose it's improving the page load speed from 2 seconds to 1 second, and your team says, "Oh, that's pretty tight. I don't know whether that's theoretically possible, but it's really, really tough." And you think that's a great stretch goal. Like, let's do that as a stretch goal. And they say, "Yes, let's do it as a stretch goal." But then you tell your managers and your stakeholders that you have a goal to get to 1 second. They'll see that as a baseline or a commitment. Unless you have a great relationship with them and they really do understand this idea of stretch goals and ambition and are comfortable with that, are really comfortable with that, and you manage that carefully, you'll just end up them being excited about the goal, which is great because you'll feel good, but then so disappointed when you only get to 1.2 instead of 1. Whereas your team will be super proud that they got to 1.2. So that's a disaster when that happens, because you've set the wrong expectations. People are then disappointed, and then they think, well, that's why OKRs don't work, which isn't a big problem. But more importantly, they say that's why you're not a very good leader, right? And now you're kind of on a performance improvement program or whatever it is you do. You're in the doghouse. So don't do that. So make sure you're being really clear about what expectations to set. I recommend setting only non-stretch goals, like confident goals, or at least setting 2 sets of OKRs, the same thing. Here are the ones that I'll use to set expectations that are not stretch goals, that are confident. And here are the ones that I'm using to set targets for my team, which are stretch goals. So that's one way of doing it that you can do it. But then you just make sure you never communicate the stretch goals outside. Make sure your team all understand that these are the internal stretch goals, but this is what we're managing expectations with. And so that can go and get the best of both worlds. So then you can do that. What's happening now is you're delivering OKRs, you're working with OKRs, and if you're able to deliver good results, like if you occasionally do go past one of those committed goals and you hit your stretch goal, you get close to your stretch goal, people, well, how did you do that? That's really good. That's seems to be going really well. We've got good results from this team. We've got focus on this team. This team is able to say no. And this is the other thing, is when you're working with expectation management, using OKRs for expectation management is super useful, because you can say, here's what we're trying to achieve. Here's the goal we're going towards, the direction we're going towards, and that's why we're not doing those things. They come up with another idea. No, we're not doing that because we're doing these things, right? So it's actually quite a good tool for managing expectations, as long as you're clear about what you're actually doing and what you're not doing, right? So what's a stretch goal and what's not? So be careful about stretch goals. And so I'm going off on a tangent here. do run OKRs in your team, make sure it works really well. And by setting that example, by being able to manage expectations, by being able to talk about, here are the things we're working on, these are the objectives that we have, and these are the key results. Our definition of success is at these key results. People will understand that. They don't need to understand OKRs. It's nothing magical here. They'll understand that, and they'll think, oh, that's actually quite good. You've got a really clear set of directions, and your team sees you're executing well, and then they start to be interested in using OKRs. And so a lot of organizations will start OKRs in one subset, one group, because of exactly that reason. But then it has to perform, and then they'll stretch it out. If your management's not interested in OKRs, you just start doing them and start using them as part of your mechanism for communicating about expectations. Be careful about stretch goals, but you'll be fine. Okay, the next question is related to this. Is how do I get executive buy-in for my OKRs? Like, I've got a team and I've set it to OKRs. When I tell my exec team, my managers or whatever, this is my OKRs, how do I get them to buy into this? How do I get them to support this? This is fundamentally about listening to what your manager is looking for, right? And sometimes it helps to be able to say, if you're unfortunate enough that your manager isn't great at communicating priorities or deciding priorities or being clear about goals, that's which is really common, surprisingly common. Um, then sometimes it really helps to be just write down, here are the goals that I'm working towards or that my team's working towards. This is the goals that we're trying to do, and now you can have a discussion. Now, what's going to happen here is that if you disagree on something, then well, if you agree, that's really easy, and you've got your executive buy-in. Where you disagree, it becomes harder. There are two types of disagreement that I want to talk about. One is, I don't think this is the right goal, or this is the right answer, this is the right result. And the second one is, I think we should be doing more. And this more might be a more aggressive target on the same line, or a higher number of different things. Um, Now, in the first case, when you have a disagreement about what to do, which things to be working on, which are the right goals, right? You should have different goals for what you're doing. That's something that I think, realistically, you have a small chance to be able to convince your manager this is the right thing to do and this is why. And usually the why should be related to who the manager's stakeholders are, right? So, and sometimes it's related to the team. Like sometimes being you've got to think the team is actually their stakeholder, right? They do depend on the team. So they want the team to be happy and want the team to be productive and able to deliver things and solve some of their technical debt if they have technical debt, things like that. So that is important. But you want to make sure you understand who your manager is trying to keep happy, whether that's customers, partners, downstream partners, upstream partners, their manager, whoever it is. Like, what are they trying to keep happy? What are they trying to achieve? And how does what you're doing help them do that? Because if what you've got in your account doesn't help them do that, it's not going to get their buy-in, and it's not going to get support, and it shouldn't get support, and you should change them. And that's the job, right? And so this is one of the things that I find, I've certainly seen this, particularly from people who've come up as new managers from a technical background, and I did the same thing. I told you earlier, I did the same thing. Going from a technical background into a management role or being a new manager, having an opinion about what to do, and then wanting to push that opinion, it's great, but the reason your manager is your manager is because it's their job to make some of these decisions, and they've made different decisions. And so they might be wrong, they might be right, but unfortunately, when you're talking about a company, you're trying to execute a strategy from it's not necessarily just a diktat of the CEO, but somewhere along the line they've decided the strategy, and you have to make decisions. And sometimes those decisions are things you disagree with, but the purpose of the company is to execute those decisions and execute them the best as we can. And if we execute them well and they don't work, then we learn from the decisions, and those managers learn from the decisions, right? That's how let's change things. If we don't execute them well and they don't work, then those managers think that the problem is the execution, right? And then they've got to change the people executing, or they've got to fix the execution problem. It's a disaster. So always, always, always execute the things that your managers need, right? That's number one. You can convince them, you can have some input to them, you can change them, you can, especially if you have information about customers and stakeholders and so on, that can change their opinion. But at the end of the day, if they're not happy with it, if they don't buy into it, you've got to produce something they'll buy into. Now, the second kind of problem is I want you to do more problem. Like you've said, you want to get to 1 second page load time. I think we should get to half a second or 500 milliseconds or whatever it is. We want to be more ambitious. We want to be bolder. Or you've got 3 objectives and 3 key results. I'd like you to have 17 objectives because I want you to do all of these different things. This is a much harder problem, and this is not something that is difficult to solve. The only way to really solve this is to provide information and education about what capacity your team actually has to deliver these things. Sometimes this is about, half a second sounds great. However, the round trip time for the internet ping time is 450 milliseconds. So we can't do this. And the database that we can't change has a 0.3 second response time. We have to make two calls on this database. So we're not going to get to 0.5 seconds or whatever it is, right? Something technical. It might be about, we have this many people on the team and it's going to take us that long, and they're currently working on these things, so we only have about this much effort to put into this. We don't think we can do it. Whatever it is. Now, some of this comes down to personal judgment of you as a leader, and your team for that matter. Like, are you actually pushing hard enough? Like sometimes managers are right to push you harder and go, okay, we can figure out a way of doing this. And I have seen so many situations where a manager said, oh, I think we can do better than this. And the team's gone back to the drawing board and said, oh, can't possibly do better than that. How do we do better than that? And they thought about it for half an hour to an hour, 3 hours maybe. They've done some deep dives on some problems, and they found ways of doing this. And I had one situation in particular at Amazon where a team initially said, yes, we can do that. It'll take 3 months to do this thing. And we said, 3 months is not good enough. We need this in less than a month. What else can we do here? And they said, no, we can't do anything. And we escalated. We had, the way it works at Amazon is you get directors involved. So we escalated, and they said, okay, well, we'll pull some extra people on, spend an extra hour or two on this. Yeah, they spent an hour or two, maybe it was 4, on this problem. And they came up with a way of doing it in 1.5 weeks. And then when they executed it, it actually took them less than a week, right? When they actually did it. The only reason they came up with this better solution was because we pushed them hard enough that they actually came up with it. Sometimes pushing helps, and you've got to do the work to make sure that you have really gone through the issues to find out. So that's the kind of thing you can do. You can push and figure out. Sometimes the manager's right. Sometimes their instinct is correct. You can do more, and you can be more ambitious. There's nothing wrong with that. It's part of the job of being a leader. Is pushing the team and trying to find where is the limit. What can we do? What is ambitious? What's the best that is realistic? Is this really our best work? Is this really the best we can do? That kind of thing. It's sometimes uncomfortable, but that's what you have to do. And the other part was about if you have too many objectives. Now, the too many objectives problem is a challenging problem because most execs, most managers would love to do more things. I've got 10 things on my list. We've got to do all 10 things. The difficulty with this is that frequently enough you can't do that many things. You just can't focus on so many things. So the way I think you have to deal with this is there's really 2 ways. One is to start out with, well, what's the priority of the things? Let's suppose you can only have one of the things. Which is the thing, right? And just force a stack rank. What is the stack rank of this? Which the one? I know they're all essential. I know they're all 100% critical, but what's the most essential? Right? And it's a tough question. You got to go through that and provide a ranked list, right? You can then, as you do this, you could provide a list. You can say, this is what I think the list is. This is where I think the list is. And then when you talk to your team, you can draw a line under where you think you'll get to. Like if we go through this list, we do this. Then the question becomes, should we change anything around here? Number one, is anything in the wrong order? Because if we do more, we'll probably bring this line down the list, and that becomes that earlier question we had. The other thing you can do in this situation is try to merge some of them into a single statement or single goal, which is tough because that may mean you have to do more work, and that's not necessarily good. But at least you're focusing the communication. If you try and say we're going to do these 17 things, it confuses people. But if you have 3 things, and they're a bit broader, but you have 3 things, at least it's the kind of things that people can remember and get their teeth into. So that's my tips on how to get executive buy-in for OKRs. So firstly, understand the customer, your managers, stakeholders, and their needs and their problems, and how your OKRs are going to help them solve their problems, and actually really listen to them and what they need, and educate your team on what your manager needs, because you have to line up with what they need. That's the job. Secondly, getting buy-in for OKRs when your managers propose something and then when your manager wants more. Is to do that whole thing about, let's go and dig in and see if we can push for more. Draw a prioritized list and draw a line under where you think you'll get to, and make sure that you've got the list in the right priority, like in the right stack ranking order. And merge some things together sometimes with OKRs. It's an interesting question because with tasks, you can't always merge them. It doesn't necessarily help. But with OKRs, you potentially can. And sometimes you can be having a bigger impact without necessarily doing more work, if that makes sense. It's one of those things that tends to happen in teams when you're working together. Right. I've been through enough of these questions that I think we're all worn out. I'm worn out, that's for sure. So I'll leave it there. But thanks for listening. If you've stayed on, I'm very keen to hear any further questions you have. If you're watching this later on YouTube or on the replay on the LinkedIn, hello. Or if you're watching this or listening to this on the podcast, hello. Feel free to send me any questions you might have, anything that's come out of this, any questions you might have about OKRs or leadership or management in Scaleups or outside of Scaleups. And we'll address them in the future LinkedIn, future Scaleup Leader Live. Thanks very much and have a great weekend. It's Friday. Bye-bye.